Kia ora tātou, thanks for joining us. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes as the numbers are going up. Kia ora. I'm just going to kick us off with a karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mākina kina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. E hiaki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei, mauri ora. Kia ora tātou. E hara ahau i te tangata mōhio ki te kōrero o tira, e tiki ana kia mihi atu, kia mihi mai. Ko te mihi tuatahi ki te atua, he mihi mahana ki te ariki nui, ara te kuini Māori, nā wai hono i te pōpaki. Kia papatua anuku, te whaia, tēnā koe. Kia rangi nui, te mātua, tēnā koe. Ki nā mate, haere, haere, haere atu rā. Ki nā tini aitoa, haere, haere, whakanaro atu rā. Hoki mai kia tātou nā kanohi ora. Nō reira, he mihi mahana kia koutou i ngā rangatira. Ka mihi ki ngā iwi kāinga, ki a Ngāti Rangi Nui, ko Ngāti Pukenga, ko Ngāi Te Rangi. Ka mihi hoki ki ngā hoa mahi i te whenua katoa. Kia korua oku kai kōrero, Lucy, rawa ko Leana, tēnā korua. He mihi nui, he mihi aroha. Ko te kohatu whakairi nā te roirangi, ko whangatawatia nā maunga, ko waiho, ko wairoa nā awa, ko tikapa moana, ko karirikura nā moana, ko tainui, ko tinana nā waka, ko Ngāti Maru, ko te rarawa nā iwi, ko Ngāti Rautau, ko Ngāti Waiora nā hapu, ko Mātai Whitu, ko Roma nā marae, ko Shari Gallup aho. Kia ora tātou, my name's Shari Gallup and I'm based in Tauranga at PDP or Paddle Dallimore Partners, and really happy to be co-hosting this webinar today. Ka huri ki Bryony, my co-host.
Kia ora, Shari. Kia ora tātou. Ko o te hurua a te puhi tuia, te moanga, ko otaku te moana. Ko te pakiha a te Atiawa toku te iwi, ko Ngāti Te Whiti toku hapu. No Otipoti ahau, ko Mila taku whānau, ko Bryony taku ingoa. Thank you, Shari. Great to be here today, and I'm really thrilled to have so many people joining us. My name is Bryony Miller. I'm based down in Invercargill, currently working for E3 Scientific. So I was just going to have a quick introduction before we kick into listening to our other presenters, Lucy and Leana, today. And just to provide a little bit of an overview of who the Coastal Society are for anybody who is joining us who isn't a member or who hasn't been aware of them in the past. So the New Zealand or Aotearoa Coastal Society, or NZCS, was formed in 1992, about 34 years old, following the creation of the Resource Management Act, or RMA, in 1991. And as many of you may know, the RMA required councils just to be a wee bit more involved in the takatai, preparing coastal plans and taking a greater role in activities in and around the coast, which obviously in turn then saw the need for improved coastal information and communication across a whole range of disciplines. NZCS responded to this need in good kind, I think, and created a multidisciplinary society, which brings in members from engineering, planning, ecology, and coastal management backgrounds. So we are a technical group of Engineering New Zealand, but as mentioned, we really believe our strength lies in the diversity of expertise that come together under the NZCS umbrella. We don't have any entry criteria for the society. and we do really welcome membership inquiries from anyone with an interest or love of the takatai. I guess our overall vision really at the NZCS is to support and promote the sustainable management of Aotearoa's coastal and marine taio, really underpinned with a sound science, engineering policy and Mātauranga practice. So that's where we've come from. Shari and myself are the co-leads of a relatively new portfolio, which is the Te Komiti Māori portfolio, which we introduced to the NZCS in 2023. Our real main focus in creating this portfolio is to just ensure Te Ao Māori is cherished in the NZCS through our activities and our resources. An important aspect of this is what we're doing today and supporting Māori coastal scientists and students in their mahi. That really leads us to a webinar, which is one of hopefully many, as it grows, resources at the NZCS. And we're thrilled to have you all join us, listen to the kōrero, support Leana and Lucy's mahi. So very little short bit of housekeeping, because I'm sure nobody particularly is here to listen to me. So at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A, which looks like somebody's already found, which is fantastic. You can submit your questions on here at any time during the presentation. We'll collate them, and at the very end of both presentations, we will get involved in that and spark up a conversation with our speakers at that point. The questions are open for all attendees in view, so we encourage you to use the upvote function. So any questions that you might be curious about too. Also, just to note that this webinar is being recorded, and we will aim to collate that and share that in the very near future as well. We will have perhaps have a link in the chat to the Coastal Society website and also for any membership. And we have also recently introduced, again under the Te Komiti Māori portfolio, that we have a free community option to join the mailing list. So if you just want to be interested or just keep in touch with what's happening in this space, you can keep your finger on the pulse through that. I think that's everything from me at this point in time. Ka hure ki Shari.
Kia ora, Bryony. So without further ado, we're going to introduce the first of our speakers. So both Lucy and Leana have been past scholarship winners from the Coastal Society. So it's really awesome to hear from them today. So first up, we're going to have Lucy. She's doing her master's at Te Whare o Waitaha, University of Canterbury. And she's going to talk to us today about some of her work of eco-coastal resilience. Kia ora, Lucy.
Kia ora, Shari, thank you very much for that. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā mihi nui to the New Zealand Coastal Society and Te Komiti Māori for hosting this webinar, and to my colleague Leana as well for presenting. Nau mai haere mai to you all joining us today online as well. Ko takitimu te maunga, ko takitimu te waka, ko aparima te awa, ko kaitahu Ngāti Porou, me Ngāti Kahungunu nā iwi, ko Ngāti Hini te wai te hapu, ko takutai o te titi te marae, ko Lucy Colston toko ingoa, no te tarawhiti aho, engari kei o tautahi tōku kāinga e nānei. No akunga, he akunga aho ki te whare wānanga o Waitaha. So I whakapapa up north to Ngāti Porou and Ngāti Kahungunu, Ngāti Kahungunu, and down south to Ngātahu. And I'm from Gisborne, but I live and study in Christchurch. Today I'll be sharing with you my master's research, which is focusing on what Indigenous empowerment looks like in highly modified systems with an eco-resilience lens, using Waitarikau and Waituna coastal lagoons as case studies. I will touch on the overview of the project, its background, and then move on to the research approach and design before ending with some of my preliminary results and my next steps moving forward. So the whakapapa of this research begins with the Fish Futures project, which is funded by an NBIE Endeavour grant. This project works with various organisations and tangata whenua across Aotearoa. I am a part of the socio-ecological systems step, and I am working with Te Ao Marama Incorporated and Aoraki Environmental Consultancy Limited in these lagoon systems. So Te Ao Marama Incorporated, or TAMI, and Aoraki Environmental Consultancy Limited, or AECL, are the environmental consultancies of Ngāi Tahu ki Murihiku and Ngāi Tahu ki Arowhenua, respectively. So initially we met with AECL and TAMI to discuss what the issues were in the lagoons and what they wanted to get out of this mahi. This was a massively important part of the whakawhanaungatanga process, which is an aspect of kaupapa Māori of research, which I'll speak on later. During these hui, there was large discussion about how the lagoons got to their current state, what the barriers for engagement were, and what some of the aspirations mana whenua hold for the lagoons moving forward. Our kind of overall research aim is what does Indigenous empowerment look like in highly modified systems, and we're hoping within that to explore how we can encourage Indigenous empowerment for better outcomes for people in place. So why do we need this research? The Anthropocene has modified the environment at a large and often irreversible scale. This has resulted in highly modified ecosystems, which are ecosystems or environments that have undergone significant change due to human intervention. Within these systems, the level of modification can lead to novel ecosystems, which do not reflect the original species composition as a result of human agency. It is often assumed that there is no Indigenous value in highly modified or novel ecosystems because the environment has changed so much. This can lead to Indigenous people being excluded from the systems where they once had a large presence. As such, it can result in a loss of culture, language, identity, tradition, and knowledge of the systems, which reduces the connection of people to the system, thus allowing for the environment to continue to be modified, degraded, and devalued. Now, traditionally, Indigenous ways of life were defined by living in unison with nature. So the inclusion of Te Ao Māori perspectives can really enrich the socio-ecological systems discourse and provide a far more comprehensive framework for management. In modern governance and management, in the modern governance and management climate, we really have to ask how we can include Indigenous ways of thinking to better represent the intrinsic and relational values of Te Taiao. To finally get to the case studies, Waitarakau and Waituna are located in Te Waipounamu on east and south coast respectively. Both lagoons are classified as Waituna type lagoons, which differs from Hapua classification, as the seaward barrier is largely controlled by a high energy wave climate. Both lagoons have historically or continue to be really highly productive ecosystems. Mana whenua in both of these catchments have also used the lagoons as mahinga kai or food baskets previously. Now, in both catchments, there is high levels of modification, as can be seen on the screen. Originally, both catchments were drained for agriculture. In the left graphic, you can see Waitarakau, on the banks of which you can see industry and also a ring drain, which diverts water flow into the lagoon. Not pictured in that graphic is the extensive farming in the wider catchment. Waitarakau was previously 253 hectares, but it has since been drained to 48 hectares. The right aerial is an image of Waituna Lagoon. And you can see all of the intensive farming in the upper catchment. Previously, this was sheep and beef, but around the turn of the century, this transitioned into intensive dairying. There is not a recorded max size of the lagoon, although at present it is recorded as 1,350 hectares, though it is widely recognised that pre-drainage the lagoon was bigger. The management and governance of these systems has not been overseen by mana whenua since colonisation. There are lots of layers upon both lagoons that directly or indirectly result in mana whenua being unable to use the systems in traditional ways, which is a caveat of disconnection to culture and environment. However, there are also other layers of governance, such as the Mataita Reserve and Ngāi Tahu statutory acknowledgement that have been really hard fought for. I'm conducting kaupapa Māori research. Kaupapa Māori is both an operating paradigm and framework for research, and it really allows for Māoritanga to be at the centre of the piece. It is by, for and with Māori. I myself whakapapa to Awarua, where Waituna is located. With kaupapa Māori research, some of the positive research outcomes can be connection to people and place, and also engaging in meaningful consultation and relationships. This has been an essential aspect of my mahi so far, with all of the whakawhanaungatanga kind of processes that I mentioned earlier on. The kaupapa Māori framework also allows for qualitative and quantitative data to be considered, allowing for a more holistic picture to be constructed. Kaupapa Māori framework also emphasises the importance of Mātauranga Māori. Mātauranga Māori refers to Māori knowledge at its broadest sense. Traditionally, this knowledge is woven into whakapapa, whakatauki, pūrākau, and waiata, amongst other formats. The knowledge in these formats, I suppose, does not confine itself to the physical world and can include metaphysical aspects. Mātauranga Māori also includes intrinsic, instrumental, and relational values. Mātauranga Māori is very unique in New Zealand, at least, very, very unique, because it is very rich in local environmental knowledge and can be used to communicate the correct and respectful way to engage and interact with the environment. Because of the values that Mātauranga Māori holds, it is a very important knowledge system to include in future management. For my own research, my research design is centred around a comparative case study of the two sites. I'm hoping that this will allow us to compare how over time two similar physical environments have changed with different layers and levels of governance, management, and interaction from mana whenua. I've started conducting document analysis to assess changes over time and space, and interviews with kaumātua and cultural consultants to explore te ao Māori perspectives. Coming to some of my preliminary results, initial interviews have shown that a deep connection to the lagoons persists regardless of the environmental state. This means that mana whenua retain a really deep connection regardless of their ability to access the ecosystem services that these water bodies once provided. This demonstrates whakapapa, kaitiakitanga, and utu as important values for mana whenua. It was acknowledged by all interviewed that to continue passing on mātauranga in relation to the lagoon and mahinga kai food gathering processes, that there needed to be some level of restoration. It was believed by mana whenua that through educating those in the catchment, involvement in the lagoon will increase in both for both Pākehā and Māori, which would lead on to more care and effort being put into the restoration. To aid this, it was suggested that mana whenua need a more respected seat at the governance table or the return of management in some capacity, and the support of this. The values that need to be protected and championed in the catchments are naturally reflected in Te Ao Māori. So where to next? I have more interviews to be conducted and more documents to analyse. And I am hoping in these I will be able to find key themes which pertain to each separate lagoon and our research aim as a whole. I believe that this will offer some really unique perspectives on the journey of the lagoons to their current state and will allow for a pathway forward to be explored. I'm also hoping that this will allow us to situate the research in the wider context of freshwater management in Aotearoa. Furthermore, I'm engaging with mana whenua consistently through wānanga, etc., to explore further what some of their aspirations for the water bodies are. I'd also just like to run through some acknowledgements. Ka mihi nui to all those that have supported me and continue to support me along my research journey. I am eternally grateful to the NZCS and other organisations that invest in Te Ao Māori and the future of freshwater in Aotearoa. Thank you very much for listening. Kia ora mō te whakarongo. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, Lucy. That was really interesting. Looking forward to the questions. Before we get to Leana, just a reminder, we have the question and answers at the bottom of the screen. So please type your questions in and we will get to those at the end. So for our second kōrero, we have Leana Barrable. So she's a part-time PhD student at the University of Waikato, and she also works for the Parliamentary Commission for the Environment as well, working up to open up Te Ao Māori spaces. So kia ora, Leana.
Tēnā tātou katoa. Te mea tuatahi ki te hongona anō ki ngā atua o te tai ao. Te rangi e tū nei, te papa e tākoto nei, tēnā kōrua. Ka tahi e tangi ana ki ngā hunga mate, haere, haere, haere. Ka huri au ki te ao mārama ki a koutou katoa i tai mai nei ki tēnei wānanga, tēnā no tātou. Ko Leana Barrable tōku ingoa, i te taho o tōku māma, ko Maumau kai te maunga, ko Nuhaka te awa, ko Manutai te marae, ko Takitimu te waka, ko Ngai te kauaha te hapu, ko Ngāti Rākai Pāka te iwi. I te taha o tōku pāpā, ko Taranaki te maunga, ko Waitara te awa, ko Māngai e mimi te marae, ko Otarawa te hapu, ko Te Atiawa te iwi, ko Toko Maru te waka. Kia ora koutou. I'm going to be presenting to you just one of my components of my PhD. But just as an overall, my thesis kaupapa is looking at the sea level rise impacts on inanga spawning sites. So we all know that climate change is here and our seas are rising, but one of the questions is by how much? And this question arises because of very localized factors like weather, earthquakes, tidal ranges and topography. So we might have a bit of information about how much sea level rise will impact our homes and coastal areas, but how much do we really know about how sea level rise might impact river systems and the animals and taonga that live within them? So inhabiting our low-lying areas of our awa are our taonga species inanga. They're classified as threatened and declining, and they have a pretty complex life cycle. So if you can see here on the slide, we've got the adult inanga at the top of the circle, lives most of its life, which is about 6 months in a freshwater environment, comes down to the estuary to spawn and lay eggs in the vegetation at the spring tide. Those eggs are in the vegetation for about a month, and the springtide comes along and hatches them, and the larvae get pushed out to the marine environment where they stay there for a good 6 months. And then there's a queue for them to come back up into the freshwater systems, and when they look like this, like whitebait, this is when we catch a lot of them. But if they make it past our whitebait nets, then they'll travel back up to a fully freshwater system and live their life as adults for that 6 months. So it usually takes about a year-ish for their life cycle to live out. On the other side of the slide here, you'll see that what we call the saltwater wedge, and this is where inanga, in theory, prefer to spawn and lay their eggs. The eggs don't dry out as much when they've been inundated by fresh water, but they also need the connectivity to the marine environment within this area, and it's usually within an estuary or along a river stretch. So as our seas are rising, they will then have an impact on the movement of that saltwater wedge, and thus have an impact on the position of inanga spawning sites into the future under certain climate change conditions. So the one thing that we need to know more about is how far up or down river the saltwater may travel due to these rising seas. So to test our ability to be able to predict the movement of the saltwater wedge under certain sea level rise conditions, I've chosen 2 case study sites. So you'll see this inset of the map of Aotearoa. The little red area is the Hawke's Bay region, where my 2 case study awa are, and the first one is Te Awa o Moko Tuararo, which some people might know as the Clive River. And in the other case study awa is the Wairoa in Wairoa. So these 2 sites were chosen mostly because I whakapapa to them, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later on. But the other reason is that in both those awa, there are spawning sites that are partially being protected by fencing or by riparian planting, but they aren't managed specifically for predicted sea level rise, although some of the local experts have attempted to protect some of the upstream awa based on climate change predictions. So that was my overall kaupapa of my thesis, and I've broken that down into 3 components. The first is through an observation sampling method of the actual spawning events to identify the spatial extent of the spawning sites. The second approach is I'm focusing on Mātauranga Māori and how much information might be held within our te ao Māori to make better management decisions for inanga. And the third is utilising a hydrological model to predict the movement of the saltwater wedge up or down the 2 case study awa under certain sea level rise scenarios. So for the Mātauranga Māori component, you can't really talk about Mātauranga without first talking about te ao Māori. So I'm probably going to be repeating a lot of what Lucy explained in her part, which I'm happy about. We're not going off on different tangents. So the literal meaning for Mātauranga Māori is Māori knowledge, and you might think that then we might be talking about the data that's held there, but Mātauranga Māori isn't just about data, but the actual system in which it was generated. So that's our te ao Māori. So for most iwi, te ao Māori begins in te kore, the nothingness, moves into te pō, the darkness, then to te ao Māori, into the light, enlightenment, and knowing. Some believe it'll come next, and then Ranginui and Papatua Nuku, who we have acknowledged throughout this whole presentation, are what we call our supreme parents or our atua. So the way we know the world is through whakapapa. Whakapapa being our genealogical ties, and the hierarchy of all things. So as you already may know, Te Ao Māori is not all the same across iwi, and there are many variations of all of the concepts that sit within Te Ao Māori, which means this part of the thesis is locally specific, but it can be very detailed and in-depth at that place. So one of the examples I've put on the slide is of our whakapapa and how we relate to the atua of certain environmental domains. You'll see at the top rangi nui and papatua nuku, and then there's a representation of about 8 of the atua that look after certain environmental domains. And through one of them, who is Tāne Mahuta, humankind can whakapapa back up to rangi and papa. And what you'll see here is that we then have a relationship, or what we call a tuakana-taina relationship, where humans are the younger sibling of all of those environmental domains. So that sets up kaitiakitanga, so the reciprocal relationship of utilising resources. So as you can see from the figure here, whakapapa organises and illustrates the complex relationships between all things, including people, animals, and even inanimate objects like mountains, and helps us to restore and examine the origin of things and our connectedness across space and time. Mātauranga is an integral part of Te Ao Māori, and this knowledge was gained by people through extensive observation and interaction with the natural world. My ancestors, the first Pacific peoples that came to Aotearoa, had this knowledge but was modified and adapted to the new environment here. This knowledge included predicting weather patterns, understanding seasonal patterns of food like migrating birds and vegetables, extreme weather events, and all was used and needed for the survival once they came here. Tohu or signs were used to make predictions or to understand the climate. For example, the appearance of certain stars, as you can see in this on the slide here. The appearance of a star during the year may indicate when certain species are spawning. So this is the Matariki constellation, and the circled star, I'm not sure if you can see it properly, but the circled star is YT, which is the star that tells us about our freshwater resources and how they may do for the year. And then so being an oral tradition, Mātauranga was transmitted down the generations through our language, our reo, our pūrākau, our stories, our waiata, our songs, whakatauki proverbs, karakia, our blessings and our prayers, our stars, as I said, our lunar calendar, which is on the slide as well, and importantly through our traditional practices like fishing or harvesting or catching birds, timia. The whare wānanga was our traditional formal education system in which those that showed certain traits like excellent memory were chosen to attend. So as I explained before, this knowledge is locally specific, as those observations of environmental phenomena varies across all landscapes, but there are similarities as well, especially related to waka. If we came off the same, we have very similar systems in which to interpret those observations, and if iwi occupied areas close by, that Mātauranga would be very similar because of the environmental similarities. Not sure, through colonisation, Mātauranga got disregarded. And this is our history of Aotearoa. Sorry, aroha mai. Our knowledge was disregarded as fanciful and mythological. New religions that came to our shores disconnected us from our atua, the ones that we whakapapa to, and those atua are specifically protective of our taiao. And the ways of knowing was substituted for another. So for example, our own maramataka was substituted for the Gregorian calendar in which we follow today, and our Mātauranga was substituted for Western science. So, like Lucy, I decided my approach to this research was through kaupapa Māori theory. And kaupapa Māori theory came from the push from Māori academics to reclaim our Mātauranga from what was written in early ethnographer books by Pākehā authors. It sets out principles on how to engage with knowledge within te ao Māori. For example, a principle is tino rangatiratanga, which is the authority or autonomy of the participants. Whakawhanaungatanga is another principle in which I've used, which is all about relationship building and resilience of that relationships throughout the whole process. It is inherently Māori for Māori and is therefore very different to other forms of discipline. It is an attempt to give tino rangatiratanga to those who wish to engage and acknowledge the collective wisdom being sought. It provides a template and philosophy that is inherently Māori and acknowledges Mātauranga as a valid and legitimate information source, not as a fanciful story to tell your children. So, for example of this is our Māui stories. They are great stories to tell your children, but if you dig a little bit deeper, you will find that this holds a lot of information on the taiao and the experiences of the time that those pūrākau were generated. So my method, my overall objective was to collate all the Mātauranga available on inanga. As you might recognise, this is no small feat, and to really do it justice, it would have needed a lot longer to do. But it is a first attempt to do so. So my approach to examining Mātauranga was twofold. Firstly, I conducted a literature search using keywords to find relevant Mātauranga on inanga. And as I stated previously, colonisation created a gap in our Mātauranga that was held in our oral traditions. Thus, early books written by early Pākehā ethnographers, although is interpreted wrong and has very many gaps in them, does sometimes hold the only available information of traditional practices and Mātauranga. So, adding these sources of information into my chapter therefore required some critical thinking as to relevancy, the accuracy of this information, and also how to interpret it once I have taken it and analysed it. I also included Māori authors and articles of authors of books and resources available online by Māori, which helped a lot, but that was by Māori across the whole motu. So as Mātauranga, as I said before, is locally specific, I attempted where I could to identify and reference the rohe, hapu or iwi in which this Mātauranga came from. And so running in parallel with this literature research, I conducted semi-structured interviews with mana whenua. I asked very broad questions in regards to any Mātauranga they may hold on inanga, so from whakapapa, pūrākau, also mahinga kai practices, which is the actual harvesting or catching of the inanga or the whitebait. And just to kind of get their memory going, I also went out and did interviews while they were fishing so that it helped jog their memories. So as a way of ground truthing the Mātauranga, so it's kind of sitting out in the, okay, this looks like good information, but it might not actually be relevant to the place. So a way of trying to ground truth that was to try and have the kōrero with mana whenua as to whether that information is relevant to the place. So I held two wānanga, one for each case study. And this, as I said, was an attempt to start to validate the Mātauranga that I found. But unfortunately, I was unable to do so due to the scarce availability of experts that was needed to be able to run that validation process. But the wānanga was utilised as another form of capturing Mātauranga from the whānau who were actually able to attend. So I'm very grateful for them for that anyway. In my opinion, I think we are going to use books for sourcing information. We have if we are going to use them, we have to determine a method to ensure the information is relevant to the area, that it can actually be ground truthed and validated, and can also be analysed appropriately. So having wānanga, in my view, was the attempt to do so, and I think it still is a appropriate method going forward. So I'm not going to go into my results too much because I haven't finished, but here's just an example of how whakapapa can be used as a framework that holds a lot of information about inanga. So you'll see here that during my research I found several atua attached to the whakapapa of inanga. So te ihorangi is the atua of rain that hasn't hit the ground yet. And so if we think about it from a pragmatic perspective, inanga use the cue of having more water in the system from that rain as a cue to move down to spawn. And so another example is parawhenua mea. So parawhenua mea is the atua of water moving through Papatuanuku, which is basically our rivers and our streams. So it's pretty obvious that this whakapapa connection is pretty has a close connection to inanga because inanga live in rivers and streams. But parawhenua mea is also the atua of deluge and flooding, which may also be used as a cue for inanga to move down to spawn, but also to come back from the marine environment into the rivers, because those flooding plumes push more and more fresh water out into the coast, and the inanga may use that as a cue to come back. Wainui, the personification of our great ocean, which again seems pretty relevant because that's where inanga go after they have hatched. But rehua is an interesting atua to have a whakapapa connection to inanga. Rehua is the Antares star in the Scorpion constellation, and it shines bright red and reappears in the night sky when it's time for inanga to move down to spawn. So rehua in the whakapapa of inanga isn't actually a cue for them, because they don't like look up into the night sky and go, oh yeah, there's the star, I'm going to come move down. It's actually a cue for us to know that they're going to start moving down. When we see the rising of rehua, that's our tohu to know that the inanga are about to move from their freshwater environment down to spawn. So my next step, so I'm not finished, hopefully we're finished soon. Don't know what soon it means, it's probably very relative. But what my challenge will be is to think about how we utilise two different knowledge systems and how to bring them together. My full thesis has a chapter focused on the use of the hydrological model and the chapter on observational data, and how do I bring those knowledge systems together appropriately so that we respect all systems as robust and valid in their own right. What I did find was that utilising and understanding Mātauranga is a long journey that cannot be completed in the timeframe requirements of a PhD. But at least the process is started and can be continued by mana whenua, as it is only them who can do so. We are only just scratching the surface of what our Mātauranga holds. Just look at what the whakapapa tells us about the connectivity of inanga to their environment. But we are a way off of utilising it appropriately for management purposes. That is probably a thesis in itself. So I'm just going to end there, and I'd like to acknowledge ngā mana whenua o Wairoa awa. Wairoa awa is a really long awa. Lots of hapu are situated on its banks. So ngā mihi ki a koutou katoa. But in particular, where my sapling site was in the awa mate, which is a tributary of the Wairoa, I pay particular acknowledgement to ngā hapu o te Wairoa tāpoko rau whānui. Ngā mihi hoki ki te iwi o Ngāti Hori. No kohu Pātaki marae o manaakitanga will never be forgotten. And lastly, I'd like to just mahi to the New Zealand Coastal Society for the support you gave. It specifically went to the organisation and delivery of the two wānanga that I held at Ruatani Whā Marae and Kohu Pātaki Marae. Without it, I wouldn't have been able to attempt to even try to wānanga on those things. Nō reira, tēnā tātou katoa.
Ngā mihi nui Leana and Lucy. And with my other hat on as the awards coordinator, it's really excellent to hear how the scholarships have been used, and just to hear that that was helpful for your mahi and to support you, which is the purpose and the goal. So that makes me really happy. Thank you. Well, really interesting. I certainly learnt a few things as an ecologist, and really look forward to hearing how both of you go with the finalisation of your results. I hope we can stay in the loop with that and keep the kōrero going and understanding of these important aspects. So, question and answer tab is still open. I have a couple, if you don't mind. Firstly, I guess more of as an overall, general, to either of you or to both of you, do either of you have any ideas on what sort of support would be good to grow for students doing research in the Te Ao Māori science interface? So in addition to the scholarships and hopefully the ongoing webinar process that we've already mentioned, but is there anything else in that space that you know, either of you have come across, have found difficulties or barriers to being able to do your work, your mahi, or understanding of your particular topics?
Yeah, I can start. I think as a student and coming from a Te Ao Māori space, we're bringing our whakapapa and our whānau in, and so it's not just about supporting one student, it's about supporting those that support the student. And it's not, and I'm not just talking about parents or children or stuff like that, but you know, part of the whole reason around using kaupapa Māori theory is to be very respectful around the reciprocal relationship that you create with mana whenua. And so having the acknowledgement that if students are approaching any kind of research with kaupapa Māori theory as the foundation, that there will be a need to think about supporting, and it might be a time frame thing or it might be a resourcing thing, to allow for that relationship to be built. Because I'm very aware that I whakapapa to the place, so I've got like a little foot in the door, but I don't live there, and so the relationship building was a huge requirement, and then also having to keep the relationship through the whole process all the way to the end, and then even thinking about beyond what that looks like. So it's a bit of a commitment, that you don't just become a usual researcher who wants to come in, extract the information and leave and say thank you very much, but to continue that relationship all the way through.
Yeah, me. Awesome. Thank you. I have a great question here from Bruce. He's asking what predators, aquatic or terrestrial, are present in and around the lagoons, and how is Mātauranga Māori being incorporated in programs to address them? Good question.
Kia ora, Bruce. That is a great question. So at the moment, they're both Waitarakau and Waituna are recognised as important bird sanctuaries. And Waituna is actually internationally recognised as a important bird sanctuary. So there is those avian predators, and within the actual systems, most of the I suppose most of the reasons about species population decrease has actually to do with the environmental state or degradation that the lagoon has undergone, and is not really to do with the predators present, but trout are also present And both, definitely in Waitona, but there hasn't been a comprehensive kind of state of the lagoon assessment in Waitarakau for quite a number of years.
Kia ora, Lucy. Did you have anything to add, Leana, or?
Nah, that seemed relatively specific to the lagoon stuff, but I guess from incorporating Mātauranga is that, you know, at the very limited, or like at a baseline, is that, you know, so many people at the local level know a lot about places. And if you are able to utilize that information to get an understanding of what predators there may have been back in the day compared to what there are now, then I think there's a good opportunity there. But I wouldn't want to stop and say that's all you need to input from a Mātauranga perspective. But yeah.
Got it. All right. A couple. God, we've got some questions coming through. Great. He pātai tāku, where the connection remains strong. Sorry, this is from, and I hope I say your name correctly, Karitiana Wilson. Where the connection remains strong, regardless of the state of an ecosystem, what might be some of the cultural markers we could use to raise awareness and understanding of Mātauranga? As an example, a kaumātua who holds a purako about a previous state of an environment that might inform interactions, interventions, and rangahau. Either Lucy or Leana like to comment on?
Yeah, I guess, purako, interesting, because one of the purako that I've found as part of my research holds a lot, and it's not just environmental information that is held. I think there is absolute benefit in you know, seeing whether kaumātua have those stories. It would be about how to appropriately analyze the information that's sitting there to be able to utilize as a management opportunity. And that's kind of why I've, you know, in my presentation I said there's a lot, we're a bit of a way from being able to do that, I feel, because the management system that we currently have is relatively, it doesn't necessarily have the ability to take that purako and put it into the management system the way it is. So there would have to be some kind of understanding of how to move the purako closer to our management system.
In terms of some good sources to look at, Gail Teeper also writes, has researched a lot about cultural monitoring in Aotearoa, and that would be a great place to start about what initial framework could look like, and also talk tautoko, what you said, Leana, about having to have those systems in place before they can be adequately incorporated.
Ngā mihi. We have another really good question here. Kia ora, Lucy and Leana. Thank you for your interesting talks. Do you have any advice for a Pakeha student or researcher seeking to incorporate Mātauranga Māori in their research? How do we get around the issue of short research project timelines? Very good question. Often too short to develop meaningful relationships.
Yeah, I feel like there's two separate questions there, I think. The first one, I would encourage you to think about what partnership looks like. I wouldn't suggest that non-Māori researchers attempt to utilize Mātauranga. And that's purely based on the fact that we have come through colonization, and for Māori, there is still a fight to hold our knowledge. So for one, Māori might not give it to you, and I'm just speaking generally here. Māori might not give it to you. And the question would be about whether it's appropriate or not for a non-Māori person to try to research Mātauranga. So from a partnership perspective, it would be about engaging with mana whenua on kaupapa that they might actually be interested in, and looking at how you might be able to partner to identify potentially a researcher that whakapapa's there, and look at how you work together to create a good research question or project. The second question, probably related, is that a lot of our whānau have research priorities, and they may be, variable across the motu, but if you put it all together, they're probably across everything, top of the north to the bottom of the south, all kaupapa and tile related. You'll find someone or a group who are interested in doing what you might be interested in doing. So from a timeline perspective, you might want to do a little bit of research about, who's the mana whenua that are interested in your certain project, so that at least you can see that that might be at their top of their priority list, and you might kind of be able to cut some of the time to building the relationship because they've already got their priority in place.
Got it. All right. Thank you very much. We've got time probably for two more quick questions. Oh, I've just got another one. Okay. So I have a question here quickly. You talked about Parawhenua Mea being the atua of floodwater. Is there Mātauranga around her that could assist in flood prediction and prevention?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the points that I will try and keep reiterating is about whakapapa. So Parawhenua Mea wouldn't be the atua of deluge and flooding without being connected to te ihorangi, which is the atua of rain. And so, yes, there is. But the idea of focusing just on her, or Parawhenua Mea, actually could be a guy in some instances. We need to think about what connections there are within our own system to identify how to utilize all of that connectivity for management.
Got it. Okay. We have one from Judy Lawrence. The science system is currently under review. This kaupapa could be enhanced or ignored in the review. Has the Coastal Society briefed the review on this important mahi? Probably more me and Shari to respond to that. Possibly not as closely as one would always wish. Shari, do you have anything very quickly to add to that?
It is a good question. And no, we haven't done that, but something we should go and probably have a look at. Thanks, Judy.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. We've got time for one more, very quickly. Leana, thank you for an incredibly interesting presentation. I've worked in the UK on projects in heavily regulated rivers where flow regimes are essentially controlled artificially based on natural flow cycles and key fish life stages. As the climate continues to change and extreme low and high flow events occur out of season, do you envisage any difficulties relating the traditional calendar that you described, i.e. first sightings of stars in the sky with the triggers for movement of fish?
Yeah, I wouldn't say issues. So, as I said, through colonisation, some of the Mātauranga got lost. And I mean, the way that I like to put it is that because of that gap, Mātauranga wasn't really able to evolve with the changing climate, with the changing, seasons and the environments that we're seeing. And on top of that, as you say, some of that flow regime control would also change things. But in saying that, the whānau that, are fishing, they're not aware of these things, but they're also very aware of the tohu or the signs that are giving them the answers at place. So they might not interpret or be able to say, oh, I'm seeing changes because of, i.e. climate change, but they should be able to, and have shown that they have been able to say, oh, I'm seeing changes here, and that is associated now with this sign. And so one of the things I think stars won't really change in our lifetime. So we can still use stars, but that star is we attach what's happening in the tile to that star. The star doesn't do the opposite. So if those change, then we can start looking at different stars. But yeah, it is a good point. And I think, especially in our my case study in Wairoa, they've got there's a dam up the top, and they control water flow up there. And there was some pūrākau coming through from the whānau up there talking about that specifically and how it was changing the tohu that they see.
Just to add on to that briefly, I think it's very easy to think of Mātauranga Māori as something that is stagnant or not necessarily dynamic, because it's using a lot of traditional knowledge. But as Leana said, like, it's the what's happening in the environment now will be associated with the stars, and that develops as our people and tangata whenua across the motu experience the environment, because they're kind of just traditional scientists, really.
Oh, kia ora Lucy and Leana. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you so much to you both for sharing your mahi today. We will just finish off. I'll pass back to Shari just for a closing karakia.
Kia ora. Kia whakeria te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara, kia turuki whakataha ai, kia turuki whakataha ai. Haumie, huie, tākie.